The Adirondack forest does not give things up easily. It holds its secrets the way old stone holds cold deep, patient indifferent to whoever is searching. 300 feet of pine and granite and silence stand between the road and what lies beyond. And beyond that silence, rising from the trees like something the mountain forgot to bury, a concrete tower. 6 stories, hand-poured, built by one man alone over 3 summers, with no permits and no witnesses and no explanation left behind except a key wrapped in oilcloth and a single line on a folded piece of paper. Don't sell before you come look. A veteran stands at the edge of a fieldstone ring, a husky at his left heel, both of them still. He has driven 4 hours for a $5 deed. He does not yet know what is underneath his feet. 3 expensive suits are already on their way. The day Garrett Voss turned 42, he celebrated by eating a gas station sandwich in a motel parking lot in Albany, New York. Fenwick sat in the passenger seat watching him chew. The dog had judgment in his eyes, real judgment, the kind that made you feel like you owed someone an explanation. Garrett didn't have one. The sandwich was turkey, or it said turkey. It tasted like the plastic wrap it came in. The coffee was from a machine that made a sound like it was in pain. The motel sign outside had 3 letters burned out, so instead of Harlan's Rest, it just said Har-E-S, which felt about right. Fenn's left eye was ice blue. His right eye was amber brown. Heterochromia, the vet in Bagram had called it when Garrett first got him. Like the dog couldn't decide what kind of animal he wanted to be. Garrett understood that completely. 16 years. Army combat engineer, 3 deployments. He'd built bridges in Kandahar. He'd blown up bridges in places whose names he wasn't supposed to say out loud. He knew how to read load-bearing capacity in a crumbling wall from 50 feet away. He knew how to calculate blast radius with a piece of chalk and a bad attitude. None of that helped you fill out a civilian job application. None of that helped your lower back at 2 in the morning. None of that helped when the phone stopped ringing and the motel room got quiet and you realized you were sitting on the edge of a bed with a dog and a gas station sandwich and literally nothing scheduled for tomorrow. He'd lost the last contract in November. Security consulting for a firm out of Syracuse. Good work, steady. Then the project got pulled, the firm restructured, and Garrett got a very polite email from someone named Kyle, who was 26 years old and had never been outside the continental United States. That was 4 months ago. He wasn't broke. Army pension covered the basics. But basics he was learning wasn't the same thing as a reason to get up. Fenn nudged his elbow, just once. Precise. Like a reminder. Garrett looked at him. I know. He didn't know what he knew, but it seemed like the right thing to say. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Actual paper, actual envelope. The kind with a real stamp, not a metered one. The return address said Hamilton County Probate Office, Speculator, New York, and Garrett almost threw it away because he didn't know anyone in Hamilton County, and he definitely didn't know anyone in a town called Speculator. Then he saw the name on the inside, Whitfield Voss. He sat down on the edge of the bed, which he was doing a lot lately, sitting on edges. His grandfather had been dead for 3 years. Quiet death. 93 years old, lived alone in the same house in the Adirondacks for 40 years, died in his chair with his boots on and the radio playing something classical. Garrett had gotten the call while he was in a rental car in Columbus, Ohio, on his way to a job interview that didn't pan out. He'd driven back to New York for the funeral, stood at the grave in the November cold, didn't know what to say. Never knew what to say to Whit when he was alive either. The old man wasn't cold. He wasn't mean. He was just contained, like a structure that had been built to hold a very specific kind of weight and didn't have extra room for decoration. They'd been similar that way. The letter was from the probate office. Dense paragraphs, legal language. Garrett read it twice and then a third time more slowly, the way you read a map when nothing is matching up and you think maybe you're holding it wrong. His grandfather had left him something. Not the house. The house had gone to a historical society which Garrett hadn't known and wasn't sure what to do with emotionally. But there was a separate parcel, 3 acres in Hamilton County, unincorporated land, 40 minutes from the nearest town with a stoplight. The transfer fee was $5. $5. Garrett looked at Fenn. Fenn looked at Garrett. Because, okay, he was not a man who confused $5 with nothing. $5 was a gallon of gas and some change. $5 was not a real estate transaction. $5 was a joke or a mistake or the most compressed expression of contempt he'd ever received through the mail. Except, Whit didn't do things without a reason. That was the part Garrett kept circling back to. Whit was the most deliberately intentional human being he'd ever encountered. The man had built stone walls on his property using hand-cut fieldstone and no mortar just to understand how the old farmers had done it. He read surveying manuals for fun. He kept field notes the way other people kept diaries, specific technical date stamped. He didn't leave things by accident. There was a second sheet inside the envelope. Not from the probate office. A folded piece of paper in Whit's handwriting. The penmanship was precise and old-fashioned, the kind you only got from people who'd learned with fountain pens and actual teachers. It said, "Don't sell before you come look. Just once." And underneath that, in the same even script, key is in the envelope. Door faces north. Garrett reached back into the envelope. There was something wrapped in a small square of oiled cloth. He unwrapped it. A key. Iron. Heavy for its size. The barrel was old-fashioned, ornate, almost, but covered in a fine dark patina that wasn't quite rust. More like history. Like something that had been handled and then deliberately set down and not touched again until now. He turned it over in his palm. Fenn leaned forward and sniffed it. Once, then sat back. "Yeah," Garrett said. "Me too." He almost didn't go. That needs to be said. He sat in that parking lot for 2 more days, the envelope on the passenger seat, Fenn pretending to sleep but watching him with one eye. He had reasons not to go. Real ones. The roads in the Adirondacks in early March were a psychological test. His truck was reliable but old, and old reliable things still had limits. He didn't know what he'd find. He didn't know if there was anything to find. A 3-acre parcel in unincorporated Hamilton County in upstate New York wasn't a destination. It was a tax liability. And there was the other thing. The thing he didn't say out loud, which was, what if he went and it was nothing, and he came back and the envelope went in a drawer, and then it was just another March in Albany with a gas station sandwich and a dog and nothing on the calendar. That was the fear, not of finding something bad, of finding nothing, of confirming the specific suspicion he'd been carrying since November, which was that he had used himself up, that there was nothing left that fit him, that he was at 42 a structure that had served its purpose and was now just taking up space on the lot. Whit hadn't thought that. Whit had thought something worth leaving. Don't sell before you come look. Just once. He started the truck on a Thursday. The office of Edna Farwell Notary and Property Law occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building on the main street of Speculator, New York. The town was small enough that the main street was also the only real street, and Edna's office was next to a hardware store and across from a diner that had a handwritten sign in the window reading closed Tuesdays, Thursdays, and whenever. Hamilton County was like that. Edna was 70 with white hair cut practical and short and reading glasses on a chain that she took off and put back on approximately every 45 seconds. She had the energy of someone who had retired from something demanding and missed it more than she expected. She'd been a water rights attorney in Albany for 25 years. Garrett didn't know this yet. He'd find out later. She looked at him across her desk, then at Fenn sitting at his left heel, then back at Garrett. "You're Whit's grandson." "Yes, ma'am." "You look like him." She said it simply, not like a compliment, not like an observation, just a fact she was filing away. The paperwork took 20 minutes, $5 laid on her desk, deed signed in 2 places. His handwriting was better than he expected given how cold the room was. Edna slid the deed across the desk in a manila folder. Then she paused. "There's been an inquiry," she said. About the land. A company called Carver Basin Holdings. They left a number. She slid a business card across the desk. Plain card, clean logo, no real information. They offered 12,000. Garrett looked at the card. Because 12,000 for land you don't know the value of is either a low ball or a windfall, and which one it is depends entirely on what you don't know. And Garrett was very aware of how much he didn't know. When did they call? 2 days after the probate posting went public. She said it without inflection, but she was watching him. They were prompt. He pocketed the card without answering, took the folder. At the door, Fenn already waiting in the threshold, Edna said, "Your grandfather was a careful man." "I know. He came into this office 17 years ago and filed a sealed amendment to his will. He told me what it contained, but not why." She paused. "He said someone would come for it eventually. He seemed sure." Garrett turned. "Was he usually right about things?" Edna smiled. "Just barely. He was never wrong about a thing in my presence. Irritating quality." The map was hand-drawn on the back of a survey sheet. Old paper, cream-colored, slightly waxy from age. Witt had drawn it in the same precise hand as the note cardinal directions labeled. Distances marked and paces landmarks noted not by name, but by description. Stand of white birch, 7 trees. Bare left. Fallen granite outcrop, mossy top. Straight, the ground drops. Follow the drop. Garrett sat in his truck at the trailhead with the map flat on his steering wheel and read it 3 times. Then he folded it into his breast pocket, under his M65 jacket, over his heartbeat. The trail, if you called it that, was 2 miles in. He'd done longer with 60 pounds of gear and 115 degrees. Fenn moved ahead of him and behind him in a loose weave the way he always did on unfamiliar ground. Checking angles, cataloging. The dog had his own operational rhythm, and Garrett had learned years ago not to interrupt it. The forest was still February cold even in March up here. Bare maple and beach snow still crusted in the shadows under the pines. The birches stood pale against the gray sky. Garrett found the stand of 7 and turned left without slowing down. He wasn't anxious. That was the thing he noticed. For the first time in 4 months, he wasn't anxious. He was just moving, following a map made by a dead man's careful hands. And that felt oddly like having orders again, which was apparently what he needed. Not someone to tell him what to do forever. Just someone to point at a direction and say, "Start there." Fenn stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. 30 meters ahead. Sat down directly in the path and went still. Garrett slowed. His hand moved to his side by habit before he remembered he wasn't carrying anything. Then he looked past the dog and up. He'd built structures in 3 countries. He'd studied load-bearing walls in the Hindu Kush. He'd assessed blast damage to reinforce concrete in conditions that turned most men's hair gray before their 30th birthday. He was not a man who stopped and stared at things. He stopped and stared. It rose from the forest floor like it had always been there, like the trees had grown around it, been forced to make room for it. A water tower, or what had been a water tower, or what had been built to look like one. Concrete, cylindrical. 11 meters across at the base, maybe more. 6 stories tall. 19 meters, his engineer's brain calculated, instantly accounting for the slight settlement at the base. The walls were cast, concrete, hand-poured in lifts. He could see the form lines even from here, each horizontal band slightly different in texture, the work of someone who had mixed and poured alone over months, not weeks. The surface was covered in black-green lichen, thick as upholstery in some patches, and long ropes of woody vine had colonized the lower third, climbing toward the second-floor openings that were no longer windows so much as voids where glass had been and weather had won. A steel spiral staircase climbed the exterior, bolted into the concrete. It rose from the ground intact to roughly the second floor. Then there was a gap, 3 full flights missing. Steel cut clean rather than corroded away, cut deliberately. And then the staircase resumed and climbed to the fifth floor before terminating in a steel platform that jutted out over nothing. Whoever had removed those middle flights had done it intentionally. You couldn't reach the staircase above unless you already knew how. Around the base, a ring wall, fieldstone, dry stacked with the same technique Garrett had seen on the property in Witt's photographs, the same even courses and calculated taper, waist high. Inside the ring, bare earth swept looking, no weeds, no saplings, like the ground itself had been told to behave. No signage, no road, no utility connection, no number on a county map as far as Garrett could find that indicated anything man-made existed here. Just a tower, rising from the pines like it had always been waiting. Garrett stood at the edge of the field stone wall for a long time, long enough that Fenn walked forward and sat at his left heel, and both of them just looked. Then Garrett said very quietly, "What did you build, Whit?" Not a question. A reckoning. The door faced north. Whit had been right about that. Heavy steel hinged outward, set into the base of the tower with a precision that told Garrett it hadn't been poured in, it had been placed. A precision fit. The kind of fit that required surveying instruments, not guesswork. There was a lock. Two, actually. An obvious hasp padlock at chest height, the kind that rusted visibly from a distance. And a second lock smaller inset into the concrete itself at knee level behind a loose fieldstone in the ring wall that looked exactly like every other stone until you applied pressure to the right corner. The key in Garrett's pocket fit the second lock. He knew without trying the first one, because that was how Whit worked. The obvious problem was a decoy. The real problem was smaller, lower, and required you to know where to look. The lock turned smooth, not stiff, oiled recently, which meant someone had maintained this. The door swung outward on hinges that didn't squeak, not even slightly. Garrett stood in the doorway and let his eyes adjust. The interior was round open and cathedral quiet. The ceiling was the underside of the concrete dome, and it amplified the ambient sound of the forest outside into a strange resonant hush. Garrett's boots on the concrete floor produced an echo that arrived a half-second late like a memory. The floor was clean, swept. There was accumulated grit in the seams between old repair patches, but no debris, no animal nesting, no accumulated leaf fall through the vents, though he could see why the ventilation slits were screened with fine steel mesh on the interior side, the mesh clean. Someone had been maintaining this building. For how long he couldn't say, but recently enough. In the center of the floor, no, not the center, slightly off-center, positioned exactly in the one shaft of light that came through the highest vent slot, a narrow beam of gray March daylight that fell across the floor at an angle, as if the vent had been positioned for exactly this effect. A wooden crate, cedar, dark with age, sealed with pine tar around the lid joints, wrapped in industrial aluminum tape that had oxidized dull silver. Rope handles on the sides, hemp still supple. Garrett crossed to it, stood over it. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at the floor around it first the way he looked at any item in an unusual location in an unusual space. Checking. The floor was concrete. Old poured different from the walls, you could tell by the aggregate slightly different grade poured later. And in the far corner, partially covered by the crate's shadow, he could see something. A geometric shadow that wasn't shadow. He filed it. For later. He opened the crate. The jars were mason jars. Wide-mouthed, the old style with glass lids and rubber rings and wire bales, not the modern screw-top kind. 12 of them nested in straw, each one sealed with a ring of beeswax run around the lid joint in addition to the rubber seal. When he lifted the first jar, the weight surprised him. Not food. The contents were wrapped in oiled cloth, cut into strips and packed tight. He got the lid open with his Leatherman and unwrapped one bundle. Money. Old bills. 20s and 50s wrapped in cloth to prevent the rubber bands from eating through. Soft from handling at some long-ago point, but dry and intact. He counted one bundle $1,000. He did not count further. He sat back on his heels and just processed. He was not a man who cried easily. He would not cry now. But something moved in his chest that he didn't have a word for. Something that had been sitting very still for a very long time and had just quietly shifted. Fen came to his side. The dog sat, leaned slightly, just enough. At the bottom of the crate, under the last layer of straw, there was a book. Field notebook. Brown leather worn smooth at the corners. A piece of rubber band, decades old and crumbling, held a sealed plastic bag against the cover. Inside the bag, folded paper. On the cover of the notebook, in the same precise hand as the map in the note, Whitfield Voss Field Notes, 1987. Garrett opened the plastic bag. The letter was 2 pages written front and back, single-spaced in Witt's engineer's cursive. No date, no salutation in the traditional sense. Just his name at the top, as if Witt had been certain who would be reading it and saw no reason to waste ink on theater. Garrett. If you're reading this, you've come to the land instead of taking the first offer. That matters more than you know. It means you're operating on instinct, not desperation. Those aren't the same thing. The tower is mine. I built it from 1985 to 1988, working alone on weekends and in the summer months, using materials I purchased privately and transported on a trail I laid myself and have since obscured. No permits. This will matter legally later. Keep reading. The money is yours and your sister Dessa's in equal parts. Everything I saved after selling the house. I lived on less than I needed because I wanted you both to have a foundation that no circumstance could take away. The money is not the point. It's just the first thing you'll see. The point is the shaft. Below this floor is a well casing I drilled in 1988 using equipment I borrowed from the state survey team I was working on at the time. I was mapping groundwater formations in Hamilton County as part of a statewide resource assessment. My team found something on this particular ridge that the official report, the one that was submitted and approved and filed in Albany, does not contain. A formation. Potsdam Sandstone Aquifer, 340 feet down directly beneath this tower. Clean water, high yield. The kind of yield that engineers get quiet about in meetings because it changes the math on everything. I reported it in my field notes. My field notes were received. The relevant section did not appear in the final published survey. I don't know who made that decision or why. I kept my copies. They are in the aluminum tube in the bottom of this crate. Original field notes, my copies of the state survey forms, and a formal opinion I commissioned in 2003 from a water rights specialist in Buffalo about what ownership of this parcel means in terms of aquifer rights under New York state law. The opinion is attached. You own the water. All of it. The deed was never severed from the subsurface rights because no one in the county recorder's office knew the water was there. They will try to buy this land. They've been trying for years. Different companies, different names, same project. Resort development. Golf courses. They need private water at scale, and this ridge is the only viable source within their acquisition boundary. They will be very polite at first. Then they will not be polite. Don't sign anything. Call Edna Farwell first. Tell her I said she's been waiting long enough. The shaft access is in the floor. Northeast quadrant behind the center position where the crate sits now. Press down on the eastern edge. Counterweight. I built this tower to protect what's underneath it. Now it's yours to protect. Don't let them take it, son. And at the bottom, underlined twice with a ruler, the shaft goes down, not up. Garrett read the letter once. Then he set it down on the crate very carefully, the way you set down something that has changed the shape of a room just by being in it. He looked at the concrete floor, at the northeast quadrant, at the shadow that wasn't shadow. He looked at Fen. Fen looked back. Okay, Garrett said. His voice came out steady, because he was a steady man, because he had been trained to be a steady man in situations that would have made most people fall apart. But his hands, when he pressed them flat on the floor to push himself to standing, his hands were shaking. Just slightly. The way hands shake, not from fear, but from the sudden, unexpected weight of being known. That was it. That was the thing moving in his chest. Whit had known him, had written this letter to him specifically accounting for who he was, a man who wouldn't take the first offer, a man who would read a map, a man who would press on the right edge of a counterweighted concrete hatch because someone he trusted had said to. He had been known by a quiet old man who expressed love the way other people expressed load-bearing calculations. Precisely, practically, with the long view. The long view. 35 years. Whit had been thinking 35 years ahead. Garrett walked to the northeast quadrant, found the seam now that he was looking obvious. A square, 4 feet on each side cut with a diamond blade flush to the floor. He found the eastern edge, pressed down. A low groan of stone on stone, counterweight working as designed. The hatch lifted. Cold air came up from below. Clean cold. The deep earth cold of a place that had never been warm, had never needed to be. He turned on his flashlight. A ladder went down. Iron rebar set into fieldstone walls. Round walls cased and smooth dry despite the depth. He went down. The well chamber was 12 feet below the floor. Cylindrical, 6 feet across walls of fitted fieldstone that matched the ring wall above. So precisely, it was clearly the same hands, the same summer, the same intentional craft. A single overhead bolt held a work lantern that Garrett lit with a match from the tin in his jacket pocket. In the center of the chamber, over the well casing, Whit had built a stone pedestal. Not decorative. Functional, it elevated the well cap to working height, allowed inspection, prevented pooling. On the pedestal, chained with a short length of aircraft cable to a ring bolt, a metal lockbox. Stamped steel heavy gauge, the same dull olive drab as military hardware from a certain era. Next to it, a glass jar, sealed. Inside the jar, coiled like a letter to a man in a submarine, another folded sheet. Garrett opened the jar. He read the second letter standing in the well chamber, with Fenn's nails audible on the concrete above him, and the clean cold rising from the well casing at his feet. It was shorter. You found the shaft. Good man. The box contains the original 1988 survey documents, my field copies, the state forms, and the 2003 legal opinion. Keep the box in your possession. Do not leave it here if you're planning to spend time away from the property. One more thing. The company that's been inquiring about this land, they know about the water. Not from the public record. From somewhere else. I don't know where. But they've known for at least 15 years because 15 years ago, they sent a man to talk to me very politely about whether I'd considered selling. I told him I had a grandson who might need this land someday. He didn't understand what that meant. That's fine, you will. The well was built to standard specifications for private use. Pump installation will require a licensed contractor. Edna knows one. Don't be too proud to call your sister. W. Garrett stood in the well chamber for a long time after that, just standing, breathing the clean, cold air that came up from 340 feet below, from water that had been sitting in Potsdam sandstone for centuries before anyone thought to drill for it. Waiting, just waiting for someone who would know what to do with it. He thought about Dessa, 29 years old, working nursing shifts in Portland alone since she was 13, alone because he'd enlisted at 19 and thought that was the right thing and never quite got around to asking her opinion on the matter. He thought about Whit's handwriting, ruler straight lines, every letter formed with intention. Don't be too proud to call your sister. He'd been too proud to call for 7 months. That was a structural problem. And structural problems, Garrett knew, didn't get better on their own. They just got worse. Quietly. Until the weight finally exceeded the load capacity. He climbed back up the ladder, pulled the hatch shut behind him, heard the counterweight settle. He picked up the lockbox, tucked it under his left arm, walked to the door. Outside, the March light was going thin and gold at the edges. The fieldstone ring wall held the shadows in its interior. The pines stood still. Fenn fell in at his left heel. They stood there for a moment, the veteran and the dog in the clearing, that the old man had swept clean for 35 years in front of the tower he had built alone so that someone else wouldn't have to. Garrett exhaled, long, slow, the way you exhale at the end of a briefing when the mission finally makes sense. "Okay, Whit," he said quietly. "I'm here." He took the first step toward the tree line. He did not look back at the tower. He didn't need to. He knew it was there. Some things you build to stay. The lockbox opened with a key Whit had taped to the inside back cover of the field notebook, which Garrett felt was very on brand for a man who hid things in plain sight and trusted that careful people would find them. Inside documents, organized, dated, indexed on a sheet of graph paper clipped to the inside lid. Survey forms from 1988 filled in by hand bearing the official header of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Whit's field notes from the same period, the originals, not copies, not facsimiles, the actual paper he'd written on in the field, with soil sample notations and drill measurements and water table readings recorded in pencil that had faded to a soft gray, but was still completely legible. A letter from a firm in Buffalo dated 2003. Letterhead bearing the name Soloway and Crane Attorneys at Law, Water, and Natural Resources Division. The letter addressed to Whitfield Voss Property, Hamilton County, New York. 3 pages, dense with citations, clear in its conclusion. The owner of the subject parcel, as currently described in Hamilton County records, holds undivided rights to subsurface water resources absent any recorded severance of mineral or water rights from the surface estate. No such severance appears in the chain of title. The aquifer formation described in your attached field documentation would, if confirmed by independent hydrological assessment, constitute a significant private water resource to which the surface owner holds exclusive rights under applicable provisions of New York state law. Garrett read that paragraph 3 times. Then he set the letter down. Then he picked it up and read it again. Because what it actually meant stripped of the legal language and laid flat, was that the company with the polished business card in the $12,000 offer wasn't buying a piece of woods. They were buying a water supply, and they had offered him $12,000 for it, which was okay. That was either the most insulting thing that had ever happened to him financially, or those people had never in their lives encountered someone who didn't need the money badly enough to not ask questions. He thought about the letter from Whit. They know about the water, not from the public record, from somewhere else. He thought about the woman at Edna's office. The business card, plain and clean, Carver Basin Holdings, no real information. The kind of company name that tells you nothing about what the company actually does. He put everything back in the lockbox and locked it. He was going to need help. And he was going to need it from someone who understood Hamilton County, New York State water law and the specific anatomy of how a large company dismantled a small obstacle when that obstacle was a person with no institutional backing and a $5 deed. He already knew who that person was. He just had to go back to speculator and admit that Edna Farwell had been waiting for this conversation since before he arrived. Edna's office at 9 in the morning smelled of strong coffee and printer toner, and something underneath both of those things that might have been wood smoke from the radiator or might have been decades of paper-intensive work soaked into the walls. She was on the phone when Garrett walked in. She held up one finger without looking at him. He sat in the client chair. Fenn lay down beside him with the air of a dog attending his 4th meeting of the day. Edna finished the call, hung up, looked at Garrett, then at the lockbox on his knees. "Whit told you to call me," she said. "He did." "How long did it take you to come back one night?" Something in her expression shifted, a small private satisfaction. "He said you'd be fast." She poured him coffee without asking, set it in front of him, sat back in her chair with the settled gravity of someone who had been prepared for this conversation for a very long time and was in no rush now that it was finally happening. Garrett opened the lockbox, set the documents on her desk in the order Whit had indexed them. She read slowly, all of it. She didn't ask him to summarize, she didn't skim. She turned each page with the careful attention of someone who understood that the details were the point, had always been the point, and that people who skim details were the reason situations like this existed in the first place. It took 40 minutes. When she finished, she took off her glasses, set them on the desk, looked out the window at the main street of Speculator, which at this hour featured one pickup truck and a man walking a beagle. Carver Basin Holdings, she said. That's a shell. Second-tier holding structure for Kelstone Group, development company out of Connecticut. They've been buying parcels in this corridor for 3 years. Golf resort, private lodge, the whole picture. You knew about them. Everyone in this county knows about them. They've been very thorough. She paused. They made an offer on the Hector Bain property last fall. Hector turned them down. His barn mysteriously failed a county inspection 3 weeks later. First inspection in 11 years. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Orson Quill, he said. Edna's expression didn't change, which was itself an expression. The deputy county administrator is an appointed position, appointed by a board that has received several generous community development donations from various LLCs with similar registration addresses. So he's bought. I wouldn't say that in a room with witnesses. She put her glasses back on. I would say he is accommodating to certain interests, and he can classify the tower as a hazardous structure. He can initiate the process. There would need to be a county engineer's report, an inspection, a formal finding. She paused. Which in Hamilton County currently has one contracted engineering firm, based in Utica, whose principal partner went to college with a gentleman whose name appears on several Kelstone subsidiary filings. Garrett absorbed that. This was the thing about rural counties. They look simple from the outside. Small population, quiet roads, town meetings where people still actually showed up. And underneath the same systems of accumulated obligation and mutual benefit that existed everywhere, just smaller, tighter, harder to get around because everyone knew everyone and distance made it very easy for one phone call to echo through every relevant institution before you'd finish dialing. How long do we have, he said, before Quill can get a finding on record? Edna turned to her computer, typed something, studied the screen. The next county administrative session is in 17 days. If they add an emergency item to the agenda before then, 10 days, maybe 8. And if a finding gets entered, then the structure is designated for mandatory removal. You can appeal, but the appeal goes to a county board, and the county board is accommodating to certain interests. That's a generous way to put it, yes. Garrett set down his coffee. What do we do? Edna smiled, and for the first time since he'd walked into her office 2 days ago, the smile wasn't small. It was real. The smile of a woman who had been a water rights attorney in Albany for 25 years and had missed it more than she'd expected. We don't defend, she said. We file. She explained it the way someone explains something they've been thinking about for 17 years. The 1988 survey documents went to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation as a formal challenge to the completeness of the official record. Not an accusation, a correction. Witt had been an employee of the state. His field notes were state documents. The fact that they hadn't appeared in the final survey was an administrative discrepancy that required investigation. The 2003 legal opinion went to the State Division of Water as a petition for formal recognition of subsurface water rights under the parcel deed. Both filings, once entered, triggered mandatory review periods during which no county-level administrative action affecting the property could be finalized. State preempted county. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was bureaucratic judo using the weight of the system against itself. This takes time, Edna said. Weeks, maybe months. Kelstone will respond. Their lawyers are better funded than ours. We have the original documents. We have the original documents, she agreed, which is why Witt kept them here instead of in a bank vault in Albany. If he'd stored them where they were most secure, we'd need a court order to access them in a fight. Here they're just ours. Garrett thought about the lockbox, the key taped inside the back cover of a field notebook. The letter in a glass jar sealed with beeswax in a stone chamber 12 feet underground. He thought of everything, Garrett said. He was an engineer. Edna said it simply. Engineers think about failure modes. They filed on a Friday. It cost $400 in state filing fees and $12 for certified mail and 1 hour of Edna's time that she declined to bill for. Garrett drove to the post office himself, Fenn waiting in the truck, and handed the envelope to a woman behind the counter who had the efficient energy of someone who had been moving mail through Hamilton County since before Garrett was born. Anything fragile, she asked. No, Garrett said, but it's important. She looked at him, then at the certified mail receipt, then back at him. They all are honey, she said, and stamped it. The response from Kelstone came 11 days later, not through Edna, through a man named Breckett Lund. He was waiting in the parking lot of the Speculator Diner when Garrett came out with 2 coffees and a paper bag containing what the menu optimistically called a breakfast sandwich. Lund was 45, maybe older, in a suit that cost more than Garrett's truck. Navy blue, pocket square, shoes that had never seen an unpaved surface, and looked slightly offended by the presence of the parking lot's gravel. He was smiling, the kind of smile that was actually a posture. Mr. Voss, smooth, the smile staying put. I'm glad I caught you. I represent Kelstone Group. Garrett looked at him, didn't say anything, which seemed to briefly unsettle Lund, who was clearly accustomed to his opening line being a door rather than a wall. We have a new offer, Lund said. For the parcel, we've done additional assessment, and we believe our initial figure didn't reflect the property's full potential. Garrett handed one of the coffees to Fenn through the truck's open window. Fenn sniffed it and declined. 95,000, Lund said. Garrett opened his truck door. Mr. Voss. I've got a lawyer, Garrett said. Her name is Edna Farwell. You know where her office is. He got in the truck. He did not slam the door. He closed it with the deliberate quietness of a man who has decided that every action he takes in this situation will be measured. Because slamming doors was for people who weren't sure they were going to win. He pulled out of the lot, watched Lund in the rear view still standing there in his good shoes in the gravel. Fenn watched too. I know, Garrett said. That evening Edna called. They've been in contact with Orson Quill, she said. My source on the county board says Quill is moving up his timeline. He's trying to get the inspection scheduled before our state filing triggers a review hold. How long? If he fast-tracks it, a week, maybe less. What do we do? A pause, Edna thinking. You need an independent structural and environmental assessment of that property before Quill's inspector gets there. If we have a third-party professional finding on record showing the structure is sound and the groundwater is active and uncontaminated, it complicates his ability to make a hazardous structure claim. Who does that? I know a hydrologist at SUNY Plattsburgh, Adlai Marsh. He worked for the state in the late 80s and early 90s. He may have known your grandfather. She paused again. He owes me a favor. How big a favor? Big enough that he'll drive 3 hours on a Tuesday in March. Adlai Marsh was 64 years old and drove a Subaru with a cracked windshield and a SUNY faculty parking sticker that was 3 years expired. He arrived on Tuesday at 10 in the morning, parked in the pull-off at the trailhead, and stepped out wearing rubber boots and a Carhartt jacket, and the expression of a man who had been doing fieldwork for 40 years and found it considerably more interesting than the alternative. He looked at Garrett, then at Fenn. Nice dog, he said. He thinks so too, Garrett said. They walked in together, 2.5 miles. Marsh asked questions about the geology as they walked, specific questions, the kind that told Garrett this man had done his homework on Hamilton County's formation history before getting in the car. He wasn't sightseeing, he was already working. When they came through the trees and the tower came into view, Marsh stopped. He stood there for a long moment. Good Lord, he said quietly. He actually built it. Garrett looked at him. You knew about this. I knew about the aquifer. I was a junior geologist on the 1988 survey team. Whit was the senior engineer on site. Marsh was still looking at the tower, his voice getting the quality of someone recalling something from a long time ago. He pulled me aside the last day of the survey and showed me his formation readings. Off the record, he said he was going to report it officially and he wanted a witness. A pause. The official report came out 6 months later. His formation wasn't in it. What happened? Marsh finally looked away from the tower. I was in my mid-20s and I didn't have tenure. I told myself there was probably an explanation. Then I told myself I'd look into it later. Then enough time passed that looking into it felt like starting a fire I didn't have the equipment to put out. He was quiet. I've thought about it since, more than I should have. Garrett didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing useful to say. Men made the choices they made when they were young and scared and hadn't yet figured out which fires they were willing to start. He kept the documents, Garrett said. Of course he did. And something in Marsh's voice shifted. Warm, resigned. That's exactly what Whit Voss would do. Keep every piece of paper, wait for the right person, never say a word. They walked to the tower. Marsh spent 4 hours on the property. He descended the ladder into the well chamber with a headlamp and a water sampling kit. He came up with 3 sealed vials and an expression of professional composure that Garrett had learned over the course of 4 hours meant he was trying not to show how impressed he was. Yield looks consistent with the field measurements from '88, he said. Possibly higher. The formation's been charging for 35 years without any extraction draw. He held a vial up to the light. This is exceptional water, Mr. Voss. Chemically, mineralogically. This is the kind of water that municipalities pay infrastructure budgets to develop. And Kelstone knows this. If they have even a mid-level hydrologist on retainer, they know it. He pocketed the vials. The question is how they know, because this formation was never in the public record. Garrett thought about what Whit had written. They know about the water, not from the public record, from somewhere else. Is there another way someone could have found it? He said. Marsh considered. Ground-penetrating radar survey. If you flew this ridge with the right equipment looking for the right signatures, you might infer a significant subsurface water body from formation anomalies. He paused. That kind of survey costs money. You only commission it if you already have a reason to look. Meaning someone told them where to look, or told them there was something worth looking for. Someone in the system, someone who had seen Whit's original field notes before they disappeared from the official record. Someone who had sat on that information and waited for the right moment. Garrett stood in the tower, the afternoon light coming through the vent slits in long diagonal bands, and felt the specific cold anger of understanding something ugly clearly for the first time. They hadn't just suppressed the report, they'd used it, eventually. When the development opportunity aligned with the water source, someone who'd been sitting on that information for decades had made a phone call. Whit had known, maybe not the details, but he'd known the shape of it. Don't let them take it, son. Marsh wrote his assessment in 3 days. Independent hydrological analysis. Professional letterhead. SUNY Plattsburgh credentials. Water samples submitted to a certified state laboratory for independent analysis. Structural observation of the surface installation consistent with a functional wellhead protection facility in sound condition. Edna filed it with the state on Thursday. On Friday morning, Garrett's phone rang. Number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Voss. Not Lund's smooth voice, a woman's voice. Controlled. Professional in a way that felt like it had been learned rather than natural. My name is Petra Soames. I'm general counsel for Kelstone Group. I'd like to discuss your situation. My situation, Garrett said. The complexity of your position, the costs of a protracted legal process. We'd like to propose terms that work for everyone. What terms? We're prepared to offer $250,000 for an immediate clean transfer of the parcel, including all subsurface rights. No conditions. The number landed in the room. $250,000. That was Garrett's brain doing the math automatically. That was 7 years of Army pension. That was Dessa's nursing school debt and her rent for a decade and a used car and still money left over. That was the number you said to a man who'd been living in motels for 4 months and expected him to stop thinking. He thought about the lockbox. He thought about the well chamber. He thought about Marcia's face when he held the water sample vial up to the light. He thought about Whit's letter, the ruler straight underline. Don't let them take it, son. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, we'd need an answer by, I said I need to think about it. A pause. Soames recalibrating. We'll be in touch, she said, and hung up. Garrett set the phone on the windowsill of the room above Hector Bain's hardware store, which Hector had offered without being asked for a rate that Garrett was fairly certain was below market and didn't comment on. He looked at Fenn. 250,000, he said. Fenn's ice blue eye and amber brown eye regarded him with identical steadiness. Yeah, Garrett said. I know. He called Dessa that night. He'd been putting it off. He wasn't sure why, or rather he was sure why, and didn't want to say it out loud, which was that calling Dessa required acknowledging that he'd been not calling Dessa for 7 months, and there was no neutral way to re-enter that space. She answered on the fourth ring. Hey. Her voice, tired, the specific tired of a night shift nurse at the end of a week, which was a quality of exhaustion that had weight and texture. Hey. Garrett, because he was great at this, he was phenomenal. Silence. Not hostile. Just there. The kind of silence that accumulates between two people who have gone too long without talking and forgotten how to fill the space without effort. How's Portland, he said. Wet. How's wherever you are? Upstate New York, Adirondacks. A pause. What are you doing in the Adirondacks in March? Whit left me land. Another pause. Longer. He left me something too, she said. A letter. From his lawyer. Couple months ago. I didn't... She stopped. I didn't know what to do with it. Garrett straightened. What did it say? That the financial portion of his estate would come to me through you. That I should trust you. Her voice had gone careful. The way voices go careful when they're carrying something and trying not to let it show. Which is a lot to ask considering. Considering 7 months of not calling. Considering 19 years old and an enlistment form and a sister who was 13 and didn't get a vote. Considering all the ways you can love someone from a distance that is too large to ever fully cross. There's money, Garrett said. In the land, well on the land. It's complicated, but there's money for you, a lot. Silence. And there's a problem, he said. A company that wants to take the land. They're trying to... They already called me, Dessa said. Everything stopped. What? A man called me 6 weeks ago, said he was a property advisor, which is not a job. Said my brother was... He said you were in a difficult financial position and needed help making a clear-headed decision. He said if I could talk to you about selling a piece of land, they would cover 6 months of my rent. Garrett did not speak. I haven't answered him, Dessa said quickly. I didn't agree to anything. I didn't, Garrett. I need you to know I didn't say yes. I know. His voice came out level because he was not angry at her. He needed to be clear about that with himself right now before his chest tightened any further in a direction that would be wrong. He was not angry at Dessa. She was 29 years old and alone, and someone had called her and told her helping her brother sell a piece of land would pay her rent for 6 months. He was angry at the people who had made that call, who had identified his sister as a pressure point and used her. And he was angry quietly at himself for creating the conditions that made her one. I have to ask you something, he said. Garrett, I'm not asking you to forgive me for anything tonight. I'm just asking, did you tell them anything? About me? About where I was? Anything? A long pause. I told him you were stubborn, she said, and that you wouldn't sell anything you didn't understand. Despite everything, the absurdity of this moment. That's accurate, he said. I know. And her voice cracked, just slightly, just the one crack before she pulled it back together. He called again last week. He wasn't polite the second time. What did he say? That if you kept causing problems, they'd make sure the estate paperwork got complicated, that there were questions about the will's validity. She stopped. I recorded it, the call. I didn't know why. It just felt like I should. Something in Garrett's chest shifted. Dessa, 29, working night shifts alone in Portland. And when a company tried to weaponize her against her brother, she'd held a phone to the speaker and pressed record. She didn't know that recording was going to matter, but she'd known to make it, which meant she was Whit's granddaughter too. Send it to me, he said. Send it to Edna Farwell. I'll give you her number. Who's Edna? She's our lawyer. She was Whit's lawyer. She's been waiting for this. A pause. Garrett? Her voice quieter now. How bad is it? He looked out the window at the main street of Speculator, New York. Dark outside, a single streetlight. Somewhere down the ridge behind 2.5 miles of pine forest, a tower stood in the dark. Patient, solid, built to last longer than the people who wanted to tear it down. It's manageable, he said. And then because that wasn't enough and he owed her more than enough, I need your help. I shouldn't have waited 7 months to say that. The silence on the line was different now. I'm off Friday, Dessa said. Portland to Albany is 7 hours. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Firm, a little fire. The fire of someone who had been waiting to be asked and was not going to perform uncertainty about the answer. Send me the address. He sent it. He set the phone down. Fen was watching him from the foot of the bed. She's coming, Garrett said. The dog's tail moved, once, low and slow, the way it moved when something important had been settled. Outside, the Adirondack night pressed against the window, clean and cold and indifferent. The creek was running somewhere below the ridge. The tower was standing in its clearing, the stone ring at its feet, the well beneath it, holding its clean, cold water in the dark. Waiting for what came next. Dessa drove through the night, 7 hours from Portland. She didn't stop except once for gas and coffee outside of Syracuse, standing in a parking lot at 2 a.m. in her nursing clogs because she hadn't thought to change shoes before she left. The coffee was bad. The air was cold. She got back in the car and kept driving. Garrett was waiting in the parking lot of Hector Bain's hardware store when she pulled in at 5:47 in the morning. Gray light just starting to touch the edges of the hills. Fen sitting at his left heel, both of them still. She got out of the car. They looked at each other across 10 feet of gravel. And okay, this was the thing about siblings who had gone too long without seeing each other. You forget. You forget what the actual person looks like versus the version you've been carrying around in your head. The head version of Garrett was the 19-year-old who drove away in a borrowed truck to a recruiting office. The actual Garrett was 42, gray at the temples, lines at the corners of his eyes, a dog at his feet who was watching her with 2 different colors of calm. You look tired, she said. You drove through the night, he said. I'm a nurse. I've been tired since 2018. A pause, not hostile, just the two of them finding the frequency again. The way you find a radio station when you have been out of range for a long time and you have to scan through a lot of static to get back to the signal. Fen walked forward, sat directly in front of Dessa, looked up at her. She looked down at him. Hi, she said. The dog's tail moved. Once. His name is Fenwick, Garrett said. That's a terrible name. It's a distinguished name. For a 19th century banker, maybe. And there it was. The frequency, still there. Underneath 7 months of silence and 7 hours of interstate and all the years between them that had accumulated like sediment. Still there. She scratched Fen behind his left ear. He accepted this with dignity. Show me the tower, she said. She didn't say anything for a long time when she saw it, which Garrett understood. Because the tower did that to you. It took your language away for a minute. It made you recalibrate the size of the world you thought you were walking around in. She stood at the edge of the fieldstone ring and looked up. The March morning light was coming sideways through the pines, hitting the upper third of the tower in a pale gold that made the lichen look almost warm. Almost. He built this, she said. Yes. Alone. Over 3 summers by his notes. She was quiet. Her hands were in the pockets of her jacket. She was looking at the tower the way people look at things that rearrange their understanding of a person they thought they already knew. Whit Tedessa had been a quiet old man who sent birthday cards with $20 bills in them and called twice a year at Christmas and Easter. He hadn't been cold. He hadn't been absent. He'd just been at a distance. A careful, deliberate distance that she'd always read as a kind of emotional reserve. She was reading it differently now. He couldn't tell anyone, she said, thinking it out. If he told anyone what was down there, the information got out. And once the information got out, someone would move on it, Garrett said, before we were in a position to hold it. She looked at him. So he just waited. For 35 years. Another silence. The pine forest around them making its quiet sounds. Wind. A woodpecker somewhere to the east, methodical. That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard, Dessa said. And her voice had something in it that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite awe. Something between. The recognition of a sacrifice you couldn't have seen coming because you were too young and too far away, and the person making it was too careful to let it show. Garrett didn't say anything, because sometimes the right thing to do is let the silence hold what words would only diminish. Edna called at 8:30. They were inside the tower by then. Dessa reading Whitfield notebook at the makeshift table Garrett had built from salvaged planks, Fenn asleep near the door, with his nose pointed toward the outside like a compass needle. We have a problem, Edna said. Not preamble. Edna never did preamble. Orson Quill has scheduled the county engineering inspection for this Thursday. 4 days. Garrett looked at Dessa. She looked up from the notebook. Can he do that? Garrett said. While our state filing is pending. He's arguing the state filing is incomplete pending laboratory confirmation of the water sample. Which technically, Garrett, he's not wrong. We submitted Marcia's field assessment, but the certified lab results won't be back for another 9 days. So there's a gap. There's a gap, a 4-day gap, which he is using. What happens if his inspector gets on the property Thursday? If the inspector files a finding of structural hazard, Quill can move to emergency condemnation on an administrative basis. The state review doesn't automatically stop that because the property interest in question is the surface structure, not the water rights. 2 different legal tracks. Garrett processed that. 2 tracks. They'd been playing solid defense on the water rights track. And Kelstone had just opened a second front on the building itself. Of course they had. You didn't get to be a company that bought a general counsel like Petra Soames without understanding how to move on multiple axes simultaneously. What do we need, he said. We need the lab results in 4 days instead of 9, which means we need someone with access to an accredited state laboratory who can flag the samples for expedited analysis. Garrett looked at Dessa. Dessa was already looking at him. I know someone, she said, quietly. He didn't ask who, he just handed her the phone. Her name turned out to be Dr. Carol Winsett, former colleague from a hospital in Portland who had moved back to New York 2 years ago and was now running a clinical laboratory in Plattsburgh that maintained state accreditation for environmental water testing. Dessa called her at 8:45 in the morning. They talked for 11 minutes. Garrett heard Dessa explain the situation with the specific, efficient clarity of a night shift nurse who had learned to give critical information in the shortest possible time to the fewest possible words. At 8:56, Dessa handed the phone back. She can run the samples this afternoon, she said. Results by Wednesday morning. Garrett looked at her. Because what did you say to that? What did you say when your sister, who you had not called for 7 months, drove through the night and then solved a problem in 11 minutes that you didn't know how to solve? Thank you, he said. She shrugged, but something in her shoulders loosened slightly when he said it, like she'd been holding against the possibility that he might not. Marsh drove back down on Tuesday to hand-deliver the samples to Plattsburgh. He didn't have to do that. He could have arranged a courier, but he drove himself 3 hours each way, and when Garrett called to thank him, he said only, "I've been waiting a long time to do something useful about this. Let me." The lab results came back Wednesday morning at 7:42. Edna had them filed with the state by 9. Thursday came anyway, because Thursday didn't know about the lab results. Thursday didn't care about state filings or certified mail, or the careful plans of tired people who had been working around the clock for 4 days. Thursday just arrived the way bad timing always arrives. Punctual. Indifferent. The county inspector's name was Dale Morrow. He showed up at the trailhead at 9 in the morning in a county vehicle. White pickup. Official seal on the door. He was 50-something heavy-set, with the specific look of a man who had been told what conclusion to reach before he left the office, and was not entirely comfortable with that, but had a mortgage and a pension to think about. Garrett was already at the trailhead when he arrived, leaning against his truck, Fenn sitting. Morrow got out, looked at Garrett, looked at the dog. "This is private property," Garrett said. "I have a county order to conduct a structural inspection." Garrett held out a piece of paper. Edna had prepared it the night before. A formal letter citing the pending state review, the submitted lab results, and applicable provisions of New York State environmental conservation law concerning the suspension of local administrative action on properties with active state water resource claims under review. Morrow took the paper, read it. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "I'm going to need to call this in," he said. "That's fine," Garrett said. "Edna Farwell's number is at the bottom of the letter. She's available." Morrow got back in his truck. He was on the phone for 22 minutes. Garrett stood in the March cold and drank coffee from his thermos and watched the tree line, and did not look at his watch because looking at your watch was for people who weren't sure they were going to hold. Fenn sat. After 22 minutes, Morrow got out of the truck. "I've been advised to postpone the inspection pending clarification of the state filing status," he said, careful, flat. The words of a man reading from a script someone else had just given him over the phone. "Okay," Garrett said. Morrow got back in his truck and drove away. Garrett exhaled, long, slow. "Okay," he said again, to himself, to the trees, to wit maybe wherever that went. The call from Petra Soames came Friday afternoon. Different tone this time, still controlled, still professional, but underneath it a quality of compression, like a building that's taken load it wasn't quite designed for and is holding, but wants you to know it's holding. "We'd like to meet," she said, "in person, with you and your representation." "When?" "Monday. Edna Farwell's office, if that's acceptable. 11 o'clock. Garrett looked at Fenn. The dog was asleep in a patch of weak March sunlight on the tower floor, which had become their base of operations for the week. Extension cord running out to the generator. Folding table. 2 camp chairs. Dessa's nursing clogs parked next to the door because she'd finally gotten proper boots. "Monday works," Garrett said. "What changed?" A pause, Soames deciding how much to give. "The state filing changed things," she said finally. "And the lab results. And—" Another pause, smaller. "There have been developments related to certain county-level interactions that we're working to address internally." Orson Quill. Something had moved on the Quill situation. Garrett didn't know what yet, but Soames's voice had the specific quality of a lawyer whose client had just created a problem she hadn't been told about in advance. "We'll be there," Garrett said, and hung up. He told Dessa and Edna that evening over takeout from the diner, which had been open on a Friday, and which Hector Bain had quietly paid for when he heard Garrett ordering, and told the counterwoman to put it on his tab, and walked out before Garrett could object. Hamilton County, working its immune system. What do you think changed? Dessa said. She was cross-legged in a camp chair, picking the onions out of her soup with the focused patience of someone who had been doing delicate work with their hands for years. The recording, Edna said. She had her reading glasses on and was reviewing the state filing confirmation for the fourth time, not because she doubted it, but because she was the kind of person who checked the same critical document repeatedly until the meeting that depended on it was over. Dessa's recording. When I notified them that we had a recorded conversation in which their agent made statements that could be characterized as witness tampering and potentially extortion. They got scared, Dessa said. Their insurance carrier got scared, Edna corrected, which is different and considerably more effective. Garrett was quiet through this, eating, thinking. He was thinking about Monday, about what they wanted, about what he was going to say. Monday was gray and cold, real cold. The kind that came in off the high peaks and made you understand why people who chose to live in the Adirondacks were a specific kind of person. Darius Fenney arrived with a junior associate and a rolling briefcase. He was the kind of lawyer who was good at looking like he was winning even when the proceedings hadn't started. Navy suit, silver tie, hair that suggested considerable professional attention. He shook Edna's hand. He shook Garrett's hand. He did not shake Dessa's hand because he had not been told she would be there and couldn't calibrate who she was fast enough to decide if she warranted the gesture, which told Garrett everything he needed to know about Darius Fenney. They sat. Edna's conference table was a single piece of pine on sawhorses, which Edna used without apology, and which Garrett had come to understand was not an oversight, but a deliberate establishment of terms. Fenney opened. Kelstone Group appreciates your willingness to meet, he said. The smile loaded. We believe there's a path forward that addresses everyone's interests. Garrett said nothing, which Fenney was still not accustomed to. The junior associate shifted in his seat. We're prepared to increase our offer, Fenney said. $400,000, clean transfer. We would cover all associated legal and transfer costs. And we would, a small pause, a calculated reveal, commit to a community water access provision in the resort development agreement. Discounted water rates for Hamilton County residents. Edna's pen stopped moving. Dessa looked at Garrett. $400,000 in a community water commitment. That was a real offer. That was the kind of offer that said, we've done the math and it's cheaper to give you something real than to keep fighting you. And for a moment, a real moment, not a perform one. Garrett sat with it, because he was not a man who made decisions from ego. He had seen what ego-based decision-making looked like in the field. It looked like good men in bad positions because someone upstream had prioritized being right over being effective. $400,000. Dessa would be stable. Edna would be paid properly. He could do a lot of things with that, real things, but the water. 340 feet down, Potsdam sandstone, clean and cold and sitting there in the dark for longer than anyone alive could remember. And a company that had tried to buy his sister's silence for $9,600 in rent money was now offering him $400,000 to hand it over. The math on that was simple. If they were offering $400,000 to make it go away, the actual value was something they weren't saying out loud. And Garrett had spent 16 years in places where what people weren't saying out loud was exactly the thing that would get you killed. No, he said. Fenney blinked. Mr. Voss, not the land, not the water rights, not the structure. Garrett leaned forward, elbows on pine, level. But I have a counter. He laid a single sheet of paper on the table. Edna had helped him draft it over the weekend. 3 hours at her kitchen table with Dessa asleep on Edna's couch after a 48-hour stretch of driving and not sleeping and being more useful than anyone had asked her to be. The sheet had 3 numbered items. Fenney picked it up, read it. His expression didn't change, but the junior associate looked at him waiting, and Fenney didn't look back. Which meant the junior associate didn't know what this meant. Which meant Fenney did. Item 1, Kelstone would fund the professional restoration and certification of the well infrastructure on the parcel to current New York State standards for a functional private water supply. Engineering materials, permitted pump system electrical connection, all costs. Item 2. In exchange for a permanent utility easement across the northeastern corner of the parcel, 30 feet wide for pipeline access. Only Kelstone would receive the right to draw from the aquifer at a specified maximum rate, the rate to be determined by independent hydrological assessment, and to pay an annual extraction fee indexed to the state's commercial water rate schedule. The pipeline construction permit process and utility hookup requirements would be completed before any commercial extraction began. Item 3. A Hamilton County Water Access Trust would be established, funded by 10% of Kelstone's annual extraction fees, administered by a board composed of representatives from the 3 towns downstream of the ridge. The trust would subsidize water access for county residents at below-market rates in perpetuity. Any modification to the trust terms required unanimous consent of the town representatives. Fenny set the paper down. "You want us to fund the infrastructure," he said. "You need the water. I need the well certified and operational. You solve my problem, I solve yours. The extraction fee structure is indexed to market rate, which means it goes up when the market goes up, which it will, because water only gets more valuable." Garrett kept his voice even. "You know that. That's why you're here." Silence. Fenny looked at the paper again. Calculating. The way people calculate when they're running the math on whether a deal is better or worse than the alternative, and the alternative has started to look genuinely complicated. "The trust provision," he said, "perpetuity is non-negotiable," Edna said. Her first words of the meeting. Fenny looked at her. "Non-negotiable," she said again. Pleasantly, in the way that pleasantness can be its own kind of hard wall. More silence. "I'll need to take this back to my client," Fenn said. "Of course," Garrett said. "You have 72 hours, after which our state filing moves into the formal review phase, and the terms become considerably less flexible." Fenny picked up the paper, picked up his rolling briefcase. The junior associate scrambled to gather his own things in the specific rushed way of people who have not been in enough rooms to know that leaving quickly looks like retreat. At the door, Fenny stopped. He turned, and for a moment the smile was gone. Just a man in a good suit standing in a doorway. "You know," he said, "most people take the money." "I know," Garrett said. "Most people in your position. I know what my position looks like from the outside." Fenny studied him for a moment. Something in the look that wasn't hostile, more like recalibration. The adjustment you make when an object turns out to be heavier than it appeared. Then he left. The door closed. Edna set down her pen. Dessa exhaled. Fenn, who had been lying in the corner the entire time with his chin on his paws, lifted his head, looked at Garrett, put his chin back down. 72 hours, Dessa said. "Yes." "What do we do for 72 hours? Garrett looked at the pine table, at Edna's neat stacks of documents, at the window showing Speculators Main Street in Monday morning gray. "We wait," he said. "Whit was good at it. We can manage 72 hours. They called back in 41, Soames this time, not Fenny, which told you where the decision had actually been made. "Kelstone accepts the terms as outlined," she said. "We'll have our team circulate a draft agreement by end of week." "We'll review it with our own counsel," Edna said. She had taken the phone, because that was appropriate, and also because Edna had been waiting to have this specific conversation for 17 years, and she was going to be the one to receive it. Of course. Soames, controlled, professional, adjusted. One additional item. Kelstone's board has authorized a separate payment to the Hamilton County Water Access Trust as a goodwill contribution, $200,000, to be deposited at establishment. Garrett looked at Edna. Edna's expression did not change, which was by this point itself a kind of statement. "We'll note that in the agreement," she said. Call ended. Edna set the phone down. She looked at Garrett, then at Dessa, then at the window, and then something shifted in her face, something that had been held carefully in professional containment for the entire meeting. She smiled, a real one, the full thing. The smile of a woman who had drafted a will for a quiet, stubborn engineer 17 years ago and had been waiting without complaint, without doubt to see what he had actually built. Well, she said, wit. There were details after that. Of course there were. There are always details. The draft agreement came back with 17 modifications, 3 of which were substantive and 2 of which were attempts to soften the perpetuity language in the trust provision, which Edna struck through in red pen and returned without comment. The state water rights filing completed its review and came back with formal recognition of subsurface rights attached to the parcel deed. Orson Quill announced his retirement from the county administrator's office, effective immediately, citing personal reasons, which in Hamilton County everyone understood to mean the other reasons. The state inspector general's office opened a preliminary inquiry. It was quiet, no press releases, just opened. The way things open when someone has sent the right documents to the right place and waited for the machinery to move. The certified lab results went into the state environmental record. Garrett's name went on the property deed with full subsurface rights formally noted. The pipeline construction permit process was initiated by Kelstone's engineering team, which meant commercial extraction would not begin until the following spring, at earliest exactly as the agreement specified. And on a Thursday in late April, when the snow had finally retreated to the shadows under the oldest pines, when the creek was running fast and cold with snowmelt, when the Adirondack forest had started the slow green business of coming back, a licensed well contractor arrived at the trailhead with a crew of 4 and a pump system on a flatbed. Garrett met them at 6 in the morning. He walked them in himself, 2.5 miles. The trail he'd been walking for 6 weeks now, until the turns were in his body rather than his memory. Until he could have walked it with his eyes closed, and probably on the mornings when Fenn was navigating, essentially did. When the crew came through the trees and saw the tower, the foreman stopped, just for a second. One beat. "You weren't kidding," he said. "No," Garrett said. "I wasn't." Dessa stayed for 3 weeks. She'd taken personal leave from the hospital. She didn't explain more than that, and Garrett didn't ask, because he was learning slowly the things you asked and the things you let sit until they were ready. She read all of Witt's notebooks, every one. There were 4 more in the lockbox that Garrett hadn't gotten to file behind the survey documents. Field notes from the building of the stone ring wall. Geology observations from the ridge over the course of 15 years. A record of the water table measured twice yearly at the well casing from 1989 to 2018. 29 years of showing up, twice a year, measuring, recording, in the same precise hand on the same graph paper field notebooks, without anyone to tell him he was doing the right thing. One evening, Dessa looked up from the last notebook and sat very still. "He measured the water table in 2018, she said. "He was 80 years old." "I know." She closed the notebook carefully, set it on the makeshift table. "He drove out here, walked 2.5 miles into the woods, climbed down that ladder, and took a water measurement. At 80 years old. Alone." "Yes." She looked out the door of the tower at the pine forest going gold at the edges in the late afternoon. "He never told anyone." "No. He just kept coming back." Garrett didn't say anything, because that sentence didn't need anything added to it. It was complete. That evening they sat on the fieldstone ring, the sun going down through the pines, 2 mugs of coffee between them. Fenn was somewhere in the tree line doing his inventory of the evening. "He must have been so lonely," Dessa said. "Maybe," Garrett said. "Or maybe he had a reason, and having a reason was enough." She was quiet, turning her mug in her hands. "Do you think he knew that we'd—" She gestured. "Between them. The space between them. That it would work out." Garrett thought about the letter. "Don't be too proud to call your sister." "I think he knew what he was doing," Garrett said. "He didn't leave me this land by accident. He left it to me because he knew I wouldn't leave it. And he knew I'd call you eventually because Because you're stubborn but not stupid. I was going to say because I needed help. Same thing. He looked at her. She was looking at the tower, the evening light on the upper third, the lichen going from black to almost green in that particular warm quality of late afternoon Adirondack light that didn't exist anywhere else. I'm going to stay, she said, quiet, not looking at him. Not here, obviously. Speculator has one diner and it's closed on Tuesdays, but the hospital in Glens Falls is 40 minutes. I already looked. Garrett didn't say anything right away, because the right thing here was not to fill the silence too fast. The right thing was to let it land, to let her know that he'd heard it. Edna knows a real estate agent, he said finally. There's a rental on the north side of town. She mentioned it last week. Of course she did. A pause. Edna knows everything. She's been waiting for us for 17 years. She had time to prepare. Dessa almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Fenn came back from the tree line and stepped over the fieldstone wall and sat between them, pressed his flank against Dessa's knee. She put her hand on his back without looking. Witt's letter to me, Dessa said quietly. The one from his lawyer. It said, trust you. She paused. It also said something else. It said the distance between you two is not what you think it is. It only looks like distance. Look again. Garrett was very still. I didn't know what it meant, she said. Until now. The sun went down behind the ridge. The tower stood. The forest went quiet the way forests go quiet when the light changes and everything adjusts to what comes next. The pump was installed in May. First water drawn from the new system on a Tuesday morning that started cold and went warm by 10 the way Adirondack May does when it decides to commit. The contractor ran the system test, watched the pressure gauge, checked the flow rate, and let out a low sound that wasn't quite a word. He filled a glass from the test tap, held it up. Water clear, cold, the specific cold of deep stone and deep time. He handed it to Garrett. Garrett drank it. It tasted like nothing, which was the whole point. It tasted like the absence of everything that water shouldn't have in it. Clean, pure. So clean it almost registered as a flavor by itself. He handed the glass to Dessa. She drank, handed it back. Neither of them said anything, because what was there to say? Whitt had known, had found it at 49 years old in the middle of a state survey, in the middle of the Adirondacks, standing above a sandstone formation 340 feet down, and had thought not yet. Not for me, for them, for the ones who would come after when they were ready. And then he had gone home and picked up a concrete form and started to build. The Hamilton County Water Access Trust was established on a Friday in June. The founding documents were signed in Edna Farwell's office at the Pine and Sawhorse table by Garrett Voss as property owner, 3 town supervisors from the downstream municipalities, and a representative from the State Water Division. Edna notarized the signatures. Hector Bain brought sandwiches from the diner. The 3 town supervisors ate and talked among themselves with the understated warmth of people who have lived in the same place long enough to understand when something real has been done on their behalf. Afterward, when the supervisors had left and the representative from the state had driven back to Albany, and Hector had taken the leftover sandwiches to give to someone he knew who needed them, Garrett and Dessa and Edna sat in the quiet office. 3 mugs, Edna's good coffee, the afternoon light coming through the window at a low angle, hitting the stack of documents on the table, catching the edge of the state seal on the trust filing. What happens now, Dessa said. Now the contractor finishes the pipeline easement work, Edna said. The annual fee payments begin next spring when the first commercial extraction draw happens once all permits clear. The trust receives its first quarterly distribution after that. She paused. And you two figure out what you're going to do with a 3-acre parcel in Hamilton County with a 6-story concrete tower on it. Garrett looked at the table. He'd been thinking about that. The Army Corps had certified the tower as structurally sound in their independent assessment, a finding he hadn't sought but which Edna had suggested requesting, because documentation was always the friend and absence of documentation was always the enemy. The structure was sound, better than sound. Over-engineered, the core assessor had said, shaking her head at the wall thickness. Whoever built this built it to last. He'd been sleeping in the tower for 3 weeks. Not camping, actually sleeping. He'd run the extension cord off the generator for light, built a platform frame on the cleanest section of floor, put down a mattress from the hardware store in Lake Placid. He'd insulated one corner with salvage material, and it held heat better than the rental room at Hector's. He knew how to do this. That was the thing. 16 years of building functional structures in the worst possible conditions with whatever was available. He knew how to make a space livable. He knew how to assess what a structure needed and give it that precisely and not more. The tower needed a proper floor. It needed fixed power. It needed water run to the interior. It needed windows in those vent openings instead of just open air. He could do all of that. And it would take him 6 months and cost him a fraction of what was sitting in those mason jars, which were now in an actual bank in Lake Placid, in an account that bore both his name and Dessa's. "I'm going to fix it up," he said. Dessa and Edna both looked at him. "The tower. It's structurally fine. It needs interior work. I know how to do interior work." He paused. "I'm going to make it livable." Dessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to live in a concrete tower in the Adirondacks. It has good bones. It has very thick bones. That's not the same thing. Excellent water supply. Garret. And a very good view from the 5th floor." She looked at him for a long moment, the specific look of someone deciding how much to argue and how much to just let a person be who they are. "Does it have a bathroom?" she said. "It will." She shook her head, but her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was trying not to find something funny and finding it anyway. "Fine," she said, "but I want a real door." We'd already put in a real door. A door that doesn't require a rope and a flashlight to reach. "I'll look into stairs." Edna was watching them with the expression she'd been wearing in various subtle forms since the day Garrett first walked into her office. The expression of a woman who had been holding something in trust for a very long time and was watching it finally arrive where it was supposed to go. He started work on a Monday. Dessa drove to her first shift at Glens Falls Hospital on a Tuesday. She texted him from the parking lot, weird being early for once. He texted back, "Adirondacks will do that." She sent a single image, her nursing clogs on the dashboard of her car with the Adirondack tree line visible through the windshield. He put his phone in his pocket, picked up his framing square, got back to work. Fenn supervised from the fieldstone ring lying across the top stone with his legs hanging over both sides, watching Garrett measure and mark with the focused attention of someone who has decided this activity is permitted to continue. The summer moved the way summers move when you have something to build. Days defined by the work. Mornings that started cold and opened up. Evenings when the light lasted longer than you expected, and you kept working because stopping felt like waste. Garrett learned the rhythms of the Adirondack summer the way he'd learned the rhythms of every place he'd ever been deployed, through repetition, through attention, through the specific knowledge that accumulates when you're somewhere long enough to see it in more than one kind of weather. He framed interior walls. He ran wiring off a proper electrical hookup that the contractor installed as part of the Kelstone agreement. He plumbed the bathroom, a small functional room on the ground floor, tiled with flat slate he'd cut himself. He installed windows in 5 of the vent openings, custom fabricated steel frame units that matched the industrial character of the building and kept out the Adirondack winter. Hector Bain appeared periodically with advice that Garrett hadn't asked for and invariably needed. The retired electrician from 2 roads over drove out twice to consult on the wiring. A woman named Ruth, who lived at the edge of town, dropped off a box of kitchen supplies, cast iron, good knives, a ceramic pot that had clearly been used and cared for over decades, and left before Garrett could properly thank her. Hamilton County, still working its immune system. Dessa came out on her days off. She brought food from the Glens Falls Farmers Market and ate it sitting on the fieldstone ring while Garrett worked and Fen patrolled. She started bringing a folding chair and a book, then a second folding chair. Then at some point, the second chair just stayed, and no one commented on that. The stairs took the longest, steel and pine interior running up through the center of the space in a clean spiral that referenced the original exterior staircase, but improved on it, wider treads, solid handrail properly anchored at every landing. He built them one section at a time, taking the work seriously, the way Whit had taken the original construction seriously, which was to say as if it needed to last. As if someone would be climbing these stairs in 30 years and you owed them the same care you'd want if the positions were reversed. In September, when the maples went red on the ridge and the mornings came in sharp and cold, and the kind of clear that made you understand why people stayed in places like this through winters that could break lesser commitments, Garrett stood at the top of the tower for the first time. The stairs held. Of course they did. He stood on the platform at the top and looked out across the Adirondacks. Ridge after ridge, green going to red at the edges. The sky above them, the specific deep blue that comes in the fall when the humidity is gone, and the light has that quality of arriving from very far away from a source larger than you can see. Below the fieldstone ring, swept clean, the new door solid facing north. Below that the well, 340 feet down. The pump running quiet, tested and certified, connected to the interior supply line that now ran water to the sink in the shower and the small kitchen counter Garrett had framed against the curved inner wall. The pipeline easement to the east was staked and flagged, waiting for the spring construction that would connect Kelstone's system. The meter was installed, the agreement was signed and recorded. Everything Whit had built this for was working exactly as designed, and below that the sandstone, the dark and the cold and the formation that had been sitting there since before anyone alive had thought to look for it. Patient. Moving through the rock the way deep water moves slow, certain going exactly where it was always going. Fen came up behind him and stood at his left side, pressed his shoulder against Garrett's knee, both of them looking out at the same thing. The same view Whit had seen probably from whatever vantage he'd used when he was building this, when he was making the calculations, when he was deciding what was worth building for someone he wouldn't live to see arrive. Garrett put his hand on the dog's back. He thought about a 19-year-old kid signing enlistment papers and a 13-year-old girl left in a house that felt too large. He thought about the specific arithmetic of absence, how the years you spend away don't disappear. They just get carried by the people you left behind, added to the weight they were already carrying. He thought about Dessa saying the distance between you two is not what you think it is. It only looks like distance. Look again. He thought about Whit at 49 years old, standing in a forest that looked like this one, holding a water measurement that was about to be erased from the official record and deciding, fine, I'll keep my own copy. I'll build something over it. I'll wait for the right person. I'll trust that they exist. That level of trust in someone not yet formed, not yet tested years from the moment they need it, was not faith in the abstract. It was engineering. You design for the load you anticipate, account for the variables you can't control, build in the margins that protect against failure, and then you trust the structure. Whit had trusted the structure, and the structure had held. Below on the fieldstone ring, he heard Dessa's footsteps. She'd driven out after her shift. He'd heard the truck on the dirt track that Garrett had cleared and graded over the summer, making the approach passable in a way Whit had deliberately never done. Some things you obscure. Some things, when the time is right, you open up. She climbed the stairs slowly, took her time at each landing. When she came through the opening at the top and stood beside him, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Just looked. Ridge after ridge, red and green and the deep blue above it all. Oh, she said quietly. Just that. Yeah, Garrett said. They stood there together in the September light, the four of them, the veteran and the nurse and the dog, and somewhere underneath all of it, patient and unchanging, and exactly where it had always been, the water. and looked out at the place that a careful, stubborn, deliberate old man had built a life around protecting. Not for himself, for this. For this exact moment and all the moments like it that would come after. The ridge was quiet, the water was clean, and the tower held.